Now that we know that the Nashville Predators pick 5th overall, the real work to make the right decision ramps up. We're going to talk about the Predators scouting philosophy and process between now and draft day on today's Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to kick off this episode the way we kick off all of our episodes, and that is with a hearty shout out to our Locked On Predators insider community and to our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I am Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, you know I have a partner in crime.
Yeah, you do. I am Emma Lingan, and I am the Predators site editor and reporter and host with the Hockey News.
Yeah, so a very busy time in the NHL for these teams in the postseason. We're going to talk about some wild playoff moments later on in the show. But for people like Emma and I, we're really focused on the draft. Of course, the draft lottery decided that the Predators are going to have the 5th overall pick coming up at the end of June. But what determines who the Predators are going to pick? We're going to talk today about the team's draft philosophy, where the scouting staff are in this process, and we're going to hear from Jeff Kealty on how optimistic he is that Nashville are going to come away from the draft in better shape for a potential future cup run. Before we dive into all that draft talk, though, we do want to let you know this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, Emma, tons that we want to talk about with the draft coming up. A lot of prep work we're going to be doing as far as looking at prospects later on and all of that. But today we wanted to focus on draft philosophy and process. We got to hear from some of the scouting department folks and want to share what we learned from them. But before we even get to that, can we just take a real quick time out? Because you all, Milwaukee Admirals completed the reverse sweep of the Rockford Ice Hogs and won the series. Didn't just win it in 5 games. No, my friends. They won it in overtime. And they didn't just win it in overtime, my friends. They won it on a power play goal scored by Fedor Svechkov, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, Emma. Oh my gosh. So exciting. So exciting.
It is. And if you are one of those people that's like, why should I care about the Milwaukee Admirals and what they're doing? If you will recall a few episodes ago, I don't remember exactly which one, but we talked about this, that this is the best case scenario for a guy like Fedor Svechkov to go back to Milwaukee, take what he's learned from his lengthy NHL stint, apply it, take on a leadership role. And, we said this before the series even started. We want to see the guys who have had the NHL experience. That should be evident to us. And we want to be able to see that. And this is a big way to show leadership, lead by example, like show up in those big moments. And he did it. So best case scenario.
Unbelievable. It was an unbelievable game. I'm not going to lie. Very nerve-wracking to me. You know what I need in game 5? I need a blowout. That's what I need. That's what my nerves needed. That is not what we got, friends. It was 3-3 after regulation. Again, Fedor Svechkov scored. It was a delay of game penalty. It's one of those penalties that haunt a team like Rockford when they ended up giving up the power play. And again, Svechkov scored. Also want to give a shout out. You were mentioning players that had NHL experience. The secondary assist, patron saint of Locked On Predators podcast, Mark Del Gaizo out there doing God's work in Milwaukee. I love this so much. I have to give a shout out, and I want to be a fly on the wall when it comes to Carl Taylor, because Carl Taylor, and this is off the top of my head, I would have to look, but I think he is now like 15-4 with the Milwaukee Admirals in elimination games over the course of his tenure. Friends, that is ridiculous. That is a ridiculous stat. And I just want to know, I want to be a fly on the wall. What are the magic words that Carl Taylor utters? Because this team did this exact same thing last season. They had to do a reverse sweep last season to move on. It really is incredible. Just incredible to see what they did.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I don't know what the exact record is, but in the 3 years that I've been covering the Predators, it's like this seems like this happens every year.
Yeah.
And normally when these reverse sweeps happen, like it happened in the NHL playoffs in the first round when the Oilers reverse swept the Kings. And it was like, wow, that's crazy. That never happens. And it's like, well, unless you're the Milwaukee Admirals under Carlton, it happens all the time. But
I'd like to introduce you to KT.
Yes, just because it happens all the time with them for whatever reason does not, diminish the impact and the fact that it is actually a very remarkable accomplishment.
Just incredible. And it makes me think fondly back to life coach Kevin Lingan, who has since abandoned Emma and I. Maybe we need Carl Taylor to write a book for us because he's saying something right in the locker room. He is preparing this team to do something that is very difficult to do. You mentioned, people say, why should you care about the Milwaukee Admirals? Let me just tell you something right now. If you don't care about the Milwaukee Admirals, then you probably aren't speaking as well informed when it comes to topics like the draft or a rebuild as you would be if you followed Milwaukee hockey. Also, you would just have more fun in your life if you followed the Milwaukee Admirals. Just FYI, they are going on to the Central Division Finals. They're going to face the Texas Stars. So, of course, we'll follow those games. Those are kicking off, I believe, middle of the week, but we'll get dates and keep you up to date on that. But how about Milwaukee hockey and Fedor Svechkov? I mean, 2 goals in that game, y'all. It wasn't even like this was his first goal in the game. That was his second goal of the game. So you love to see it. Of course, the Predators need to add to that pipeline. They are going to be doing it with the 5th overall pick in this draft coming up. Emma, when you get the 5th overall pick in a draft like this one, you can choose to see it as the glass is half full, the glass is half empty, depending on kind of how you want to frame that up. But when you look at where the Predators are picking in this particular draft, what is your just sort of overall initial thought?
I mean, my thought, and maybe, this might be a rare Freaky Friday moment for me here where I feel like I am taking the optimistic view of something, but this is the highest, I've said it before, this is the highest that Nashville has picked in the draft since 2013 when they got Seth Jones at number 4. And a lot of people immediately, and believe me, as someone who generally tends to do this in life, I get it, but like immediately when the Nashville Predators got the worst case scenario for them in the draft lottery, it's like, oh, 5th was literally the lowest that we could get and we got it. This is a failure. We have to do whatever we can. Yeah. I wasn't going to say it, but Anne, if you want to.
I own that. I was really poopy about getting 5th, like the mathematical worst case scenario. You saw it. You all saw it, but I'm back. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I get it. Like from a standpoint of can we just have one thing go our way in Nashville this year? Because my God, it's like we have just been, kicked while we are down all season. And so I get it. And I'm not saying that there is no reason to be upset about getting the mathematical worst case scenario, because of course there is. It's like, dude, seriously, come on. Like, come on. I get the frustration. You have every right to be frustrated. I'm not telling you how to feel. However, hopefully now that the time has passed, the dust has settled, you can look at this at a bit more of a wide angle and be like, we're still picking in the top 5. And that's really, really good. And I think too, a lot of people immediately come out and like, well, we got 5th. We got to trade up. You got to trade up. Who trades up from 5th? Come on, especially if you're Nashville and you haven't picked this high in 12 years. Like, stop being greedy. Stop being greedy.
You are at the adult kids table. You don't need to be the head of the adult kids table on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, like
you
it's
don't have
fine.
to make that move.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, I get that you're upset. You're frustrated. You still have 3 first-round picks. I still think that you can maybe you use all 3 of them. I don't know. I still think you can trade those or use those 2 lower picks potentially in a trade, depending on what that trade looks like. But you don't need to be trading all 3 of your picks to move up. Like, you don't need to do that.
Well, and I think too, a lot of it has to do with this particular draft. And this may be a draft class where the Nashville Predators are going to be more blessed by quantity over quality. Coming up, we're going to hear from Jeff Kealty. He's going to talk about this particular draft class and what they as scouts see as they look ahead at this draft class. We're also going to talk philosophy and draft process coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and had this moment of like, where did all of my money go? Whether it is dining out, online shopping, or the cost of entertainment, it's so easy to lose track. But that is where Monarch Money comes in. It is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Monarch Money also makes financial collaboration easy. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the extra stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, Emma, we have talked about this draft class and said, look, don't be fooled. This, we are not going to be Bedarded or Celebrini'd necessarily this draft class, but that does not mean that if you don't get the first 1 or 2 picks, you are eating scrappy seconds from the kids' table. And Jeff Kealty addressed this. The media had a chance to meet with some of the members of the scouting department to talk about this particular draft class, draft philosophy, and what the process is to making the right selection for the Nashville Predators. Jeff Kealty, in this clip, he's going to talk about what he sees when he looks at this particular draft class.
I think there'll be some top players that come out of this draft. Even you can say that it's not as deep of or as good of a draft, however you want to call it. But there's always top players that come out of every draft. Maybe they come out later in the draft. Maybe there's a 4th rounder or a 5th rounder that turns out to be better than it's a Kaprizov or something like that. These guys are always there to be had, and that's the job of our group to kind of try to find these guys, and this week's a big part of that.
So I love that he talks about there are good players to be had in this draft. And I think with this draft, it's sort of been framed up as like there are 2 like Vivian Ward, I'm a sure thing kind of draft guys with Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer, and 1 and 2. And they're kind of the standout names. And then there's just a bunch of other guys. And I think Nashville needs to take heart. With the 5th pick in the draft, you are going to get a good player. And I think maybe the mind shift should be not talent, but maybe trajectory. Like Michael Misa is outstanding. Matthew Schaefer, outstanding. But when you're picking 5th, you are going to get a very talented hockey player. You may get somebody who is not on the trajectory that Nashville Predators fans want. I don't know that Nashville needs a franchise changing player to jump from the draft into the NHL next season. I just don't think that that's what they need.
And no one wants to hear that, but you're right. Like, they don't need that. And I think, especially not from this draft. And like you said, I think that, when people see like, oh, well, it's just Schaefer and Misa, and then everyone else is just, pick off the top of the junk heap. Like, no, I mean, if you get the 5th overall pick, you're getting a really freaking good hockey player. Okay. But here's the thing is that, again, I feel like I have to keep saying this, but most of these players are not going to make an impact at the NHL level next year. Most of them aren't even going to appear in a game at the NHL level next year. You don't need them to. If you're Nashville, again, Bedard and Celebrini, both of those teams, like they're Chicago and San Jose, they full on committed to the rebuild. And now, again, I know a lot of people, a lot of Nashville fans think that the Predators should have done that. That is neither here nor there for purposes of this conversation, because that's not what they did. That's not what they did.
Right.
And so now they have these like core veteran players who are there and they're not going anywhere, at least as far as we know for the time being. So it's like, you don't need that franchise changing player right now, because even if you get him, he's not going to play in the NHL right now. I mean, Kealty talked about, kind of hidden gems in later rounds. Just remember, y'all, Roman Josi was drafted in the 2nd round. So again, you never know. I always find it funny this time of year, especially this year, how many people suddenly become draft experts. And it's like, I'm sorry, you've heard of this 17-year-old child before today and you're an expert on him? No. Like, people saying, oh, if the Predators don't get Misa, then it's a failure. Then it's how? He's 17, 18 years old. You are just saying that because you hear his name a lot, and he is,
his numbers are impressive. Numbers are impressive. Yes.
Yeah. Consensus top forward in the draft. Yep. Yes. But two things can be true. Just because you don't get that guy, doesn't mean that you've failed. Also, if that guy falls to number 5, then there's probably a reason. And maybe Nashville should be doing their research and checking notes on, maybe he has an injury history. I don't know. I'm not saying he does. But the point is, a lot of people look at the draft as all or nothing. And if we don't get this guy, then we have failed. And it's like, okay, well, these are kids. They're not franchise changing players. They're not expected to be, at least in the next year. So let's maybe take a breath, like collectively, just like deep breath, and it'll be okay.
I think for so many Nashville Predators fans, this was the consolation prize for what happened. And when you hear 5th, you think, I'm going to get a toaster oven. And I wanted the Ferrari. And I agree with you. Here is the other thing that I would say to kind of support what you're saying. If you look at this Nashville Predators roster as it is likely to be on opening day of next season, that is not a roster that is going to instantly be propelled into Stanley Cup contention, even if they had the first pick in the draft and it was a Bedard or Celebrini draft. We don't even still know what Nashville has on the current roster of players who have developed in the NHL and are consistently NHL players under this head coach in this system collectively. We are still trying to figure that out. We're still in the jingweeds. So we're not missing out on that one piece. And there's more than one center. One of the things that Jeff Kealty said is like, look, this draft, one of the things that it is heavy on is centers. There are a lot of talented centers in the top 10. So that thing that Nashville, we have been longing for a center, we could get a very, very good one. Now, it may not be named Michael Misa, but you can still get a really good player, a really good offensive piece. One of the things that I think is so interesting when you look at drafting is this draft philosophy. How do you know who to draft? And does that change when you go from years of drafting 11th, 14th, 17th, 21st in the mushy middle to all of a sudden being propelled to drafting number 5? Coming up, Jeff Kealty talks about philosophy and process. How do they know who to select, especially this high in the draft? All right, Emma, we are diving into draft talk. We, of course, got a chance to talk with Jeff Kealty and some of the scouts and really pulled back the curtain a little bit on what this process looks like and how different is it when you have a top 5 pick versus that mushy middle where they've been drafting for so long. This is what Jeff Kealty had to say when it comes to sort of draft philosophy and the process from here on out.
We want to draft what we think is going to be the best player. I think that's always the goal. These are kids. Everybody knows we could probably use a centerman. There happen to be a lot of centermen at the top of the draft this year, so that could line up well. But really, the job is to order them as best we can. And those sorts of things come into play. Needs and things like that. But you're never going to go wrong with that, taking the best player. Our job now is to kind of put together the best order that we see or as we see fit. It's a step process. We build the list, we build the order, and then we come up with a strategy of how we want to attack that list. Every year is different with how many amount of picks you have. As everybody knows, we have the 3 picks this year, a lot of draft capital, as you said, so that allows you to do different things. But the first step is to get that list in order.
I think it's so interesting. One of the things we've consistently heard from the scouting department when we've had an opportunity to talk with them before drafts and even during and after the draft is they really are big on you take the next best available player, and which may seem weird because there's a part of me that's like, no, draft positionally. But you take the next best player. And I think part of it comes back to what you were talking about. Emma, these are 18-year-old kids. The player who is the best at 18 years old on his draft night is not necessarily going to be the 22-year-old player who is the best from his draft class on the NHL ice. Now, you have exceptions to that. You have a Nathan McKinnon, you have, players like that where, you get these high draft picks and they are who you think they are. But there is so much that happens in between draft night and becoming a consistent NHL player. And so it does make sense because you've got seasons in there where you can't necessarily predict, what we have got to get, like say for instance, a defenseman. We have to have a defenseman. Well, 2 to 3 seasons from now, your defensive core could look very, very different. I mean, Nashville's defensive core from last season to next season, like hopefully we will know some of them. We may need hello, my name is tags. So much changes. And I think it's important for people to remember why they tend to focus on next best available player and not go into this draft with like, dear God, if it's not a center, we will die.
Yes, I think, and this isn't, try to stay with me on this analogy because it's not fully cooked in my brain yet, but the way I was kind of thinking about it as Kelts was talking was for anyone who does fantasy football, that's kind of how I think about it. Like if you pick, like I think I picked 3rd in my fantasy football draft this year, which is higher than I've had in a while. So I was like, ooh, I've got a good pick. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do the draft live for whatever reason. I was busy, but you can set your like preferred order before you auto pick of like players that you want, like best available. So like maybe your team, like maybe you need a quarterback still, but one of like the receivers that you ranked like really high on your list is still available. When your number comes up in the draft, then it's going to auto pick the receiver for you because you have determined that's the best player available. And it's like, okay, you can get the quarterback in the later round or whatever it is. Again, it's not fully, it's not a completely perfect analogy, but kind of the same idea where it's like, well, I really need, like, I'm going to need a quarterback eventually, but I'd rather roll the dice on that and
Yeah.
take sure thing that I have, or what is, what I see as a sure thing in front of me. It's like, if I have a really high level receiver who is still available to me by the time my number comes around, I'm going to take him, or I'm going to instruct the computer to take him because I have ranked him, as an overall player, like, to have priority over the other, even if I already have 2 receivers and 0 quarterbacks. It's like, well, we'll figure that out later kind of thing. So
That's what trades are for in fantasy football, friends.
yeah. So plus, I mean, like, a quarterback's also a bad example because don't pick a quarterback in the first round. But I don't know, like a receiver or a running back. I don't know. Like, it's I think that you go with what's the best available. And but you do take position into account. So, like, if you already have 2 receivers and the receivers that you had ranked on your list are not available, then you go get the running back. Like, because you're not going to pick a receiver just to pick one.
Yeah. And that goes back to why it's so important to know what is going on in Milwaukee, what is going on in the NCAA, what is going on in juniors, what is going on overseas. Because the one thing you don't want to do with this top 5 pick is duplicate. You don't want to duplicate. That is why it is so important for people to know who is in Milwaukee. What are their strengths? What is their development path? How far are they from an NHL debut? And what would they need to do at that level? That is why you need to know what is going on in the prospects pipeline. Because the worst thing that could happen at 5 is you go out and you go, you know what we need? We need a Fedor Svechkov. Friends, we already have a Fedor Svechkov. He did really good in the game in Milwaukee. But you have to be cognizant of that as you do this.
And because of this year-ish that he's had in the NHL, what he is. Like, we've talked about this on an earlier show. Fedor Svechkov, his ceiling, I would say, is like a really, really good 2C, I think. He's not a 1C. That's okay. Doesn't mean he's a bad center, but it's like, okay, you know what his role is now, so you can develop him in that role, especially now, like, you put it in conjunction with other moves, like traded Tommy Novak away. That sends the message, okay, this is our 2C. This is the guy that we want to, this being Svechkov, is the guy that we want to develop into this role. And now that you know that, it's like, I don't think anyone in the Predators draft room is like, all right, guys, so we're going to go out and we're going to get a 2C in this draft. It's like, no.
Right.
we have one. And it's like, we're going to get a guy who we think his ceiling is a 1C, for example. This is just a hypothetical, but like, his ceiling is a 1C. And at, worst case, he doesn't reach that ceiling, and okay, then you have another 2C, and then you kind of figure out where to go from there. But I mean, again, you don't want someone who profiles as a Colton Sissons, or not Colton Sissons, that's a bad example because he's older, but like, you don't want a player who profiles like identical to Fedor Svechkov or Zach LaRue or whatever. Like, you go and kind of fill in the blanks that you have.
Yeah, so much of the draft does not happen in a vacuum. So much has to do with this particular draft class. So much has to do with who are your prospects and what are their each individual trajectories. There's so much that goes into this. Here is the part where I know that I really should have been an NHL scout, and that is that you get to make a list. I'm like, give me a board and some Post-it notes, because this would be Anne living her best life. And so they talk about, we're working on compiling a list. Who are their top 10 players? Who do we like? And here's the thing. These scouts have seen these players so much. They have been scouting these players for months and months and months before we ever started talking about them. They've been talking to, their agents, talking to their coaches, meeting their families. Like, they have invested time in this kind of thing. So, who do we like? You put that on the list. And then you do we have a duplicate in the pipeline? Because we don't want to duplicate. Do we have pieces in the pipeline that would complement this person? Would they develop at a similar trajectory where if we had this player and this player, we could see maybe, as best we can project, there could be something good working there. You also have to factor in what is their development path, and that's different for every player. So they compile this list, but the other thing is then the list doesn't exist in a vacuum because so much depends on what happens. Pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, pick 4. I'm telling you, except for the whole mathing part, I would give me some Post-it notes and let me make a list because I would be living my best life. But it's a lot.
It is. And a lot of it is guesswork and not guess in like all right, let me just pick one and hope for the best. I think it's, educated guess, informed guesswork. But yeah, you're like, that's what I was talking about earlier. Why I think it's so funny that every random person on the internet suddenly becomes a draft expert this time of year, because this is the first time they've started reading about these guys, when there are people, scouts, whose entire jobs are dedicated to not just this time of year. I mean,
They're
I went,
always working, you all.
and they are always working. They are traveling. They are going into the middle of BFE in Western Canada to like scout these junior games. They watch a lot of really bad hockey. Okay. But like, you're going to get good players off of bad hockey teams. And so it's, again, you're not judging these players like, well, he doesn't look like Ryan O'Reilly, so he's a bad center. It's like, well, of course not, because Ryan O'Reilly didn't look like that when he was 17 either. So
Right.
it's like, there is sort of like, to your point too, the development trajectory and how they complement other players. Like, for example, like, oh, this player, he may not be NHL ready next year, but in 2 years, he could be a really good complement on the wing to Fedor Svechkov in center. Like, things like that. It's like, you're always kind of doing. Barry Trotz even told us that's kind of what part of what went into the decision to trade for Andrew Gibson last year, is that
Right.
him and Molendijk together. Woo. So
Oh,
it's
and
like,
it's pretty, you all.
it is.
What
So
we've seen
it's like,
is pretty.
it all, you kind of, it all, none of it happens in a vacuum, like you said.
It's a big board with a lot of yarn, but I suspect they do most of it on computers anymore. But
Yeah.
for me, I would love to be a scout. I couldn't do the travel. I get travel stomach. I would not be good at that part of this job. But other than
Yeah.
that, I would be on this like flies on stink.
Yeah. I was, when I worked for the Predators, I got to go on a scouting trip with Jeff Kealty. And thankfully it was an NCAA trip in particular. So it was like, oh, we got to go through, we went to UMass, alma mater of patron saint Mark Del Gaizo. And we got to, I'm like, oh, it's the fall in Massachusetts, the beautiful foliage. And I'm like, this is lovely. Now, we did have to deal with Boston traffic, but, that's is what it is. But then he was telling me about some of the other places that they go to and how often they have to go. And I'm like, do you know, it is not easy to get to Kamloops, British Columbia. It is not. It's not like, oh, let me just hop on a plane. Like,
Right.
there is so much effort that goes into that. So many connecting flights and driving multiple hours even after you fly. And it's like, these people are very dedicated to their craft. So
It's
amazing.
amazing.
I know that, they're not wizards either. Like, no one can see the future, but you can see potential, and drafting on potential, you have to be able to weigh potential versus like their current talent. And it's not even just talent. A lot of it is personality and
100%.
body language and like, are they coachable? Things like that. So it's a lot more than what meets the eye to the, casual fan, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's something we're going to talk about on tomorrow's episode. We are going to continue our discussion about drafting and about this scouting process. We're going to hear some more from Jeff Kealty and Tom Nolan on the intangibles, the questions that they ask these players, the questions that they ask themselves as they compile this list ahead of the draft. We're also going to touch on should the Nashville Predators trade up or trade down? Emma and I have thoughts. We're going to share them with you on tomorrow's show. So make sure you tune in for that. Emma, before we log off on this Monday, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that is going to do it for this Monday episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are going to be back tomorrow talking some more about drafts and scouts. Can't wait to get into some more of that stuff. We'll see you then.